Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by our friends at the McPherson Tax Defense Group, 1-800-BEAT-IRS, beatirs.com. That's BEAT IRS, serving Alaska Americans since 78 with all your tax defense needs. We have with us Carl Gallups. Pastor Gallups is a pastor, senior pastor at Hickory Hammock Baptist Church in Milton, Florida. He's been there since 87. He's an Amazon Top 60 best-selling author, conservative talk radio host, heard nationally and internationally, been on this program before, formerly a law enforcement officer, and he's written a book, one of many bestsellers. This one's entitled Be Thou Prepared, and it's subtitle, Equipping the Church for Persecution in Times of Trouble. Pastor Gallups, thank you for being on the show, being willing to talk to us about this book.
Hey, Joe, thank you for having me, and the great KOAN audience. It's good to be back with you.
Well, we are interested in what you have to say in this book, and I guess if people want to get it at the conclusion of the program, they can go to Amazon.com. But let's first talk about why you decided to write the book, and then give us just kind of a little hint about what's in it.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's an excellent way to start it, so thanks. I was in law enforcement in the state of Florida for 10 years, working for two different sheriff's offices, patrol deputy, criminal investigations in one of those offices. And then I've been in the ministry for over 30 years, 29 years, as you just said, in one church. And so I've been dealing with the disasters and the distress and the trauma of life from law enforcement and ministry at very intimate levels for over 40 years of my life. And I live on the Gulf Coast. We live in Hurricane Alley. So, I mean, I've lived through Hurricane Ivan and Hurricane Dennis and Hurricane Katrina, and people lost lives and people lost homes and towns were demolished, and we've been involved in rebuilding all of that and for many, many years. So through the years, people have looked to me as I've matured in ministry and in life and have been through a ton of life and a ton of disasters and the tough stuff of life. People ask me the tough questions. How do I prepare for the stuff of life? Should I prepare as a Christian? Shouldn't I just have faith and just trust in God and God will just take care of me? Or should I prepare? I don't want to look like some kind of a crazy prepper. And then they start asking deeper questions like, if I'm a Christian, should I carry a gun? I mean, is that a Christian thing to do? What did Jesus say? What does the Bible say? Should I worry about those kinds of defensive things? What about turn the other cheek? What about what about Romans 13? And should we obey the government at all times? What about the martyrs? On and on the questions go. So what caused me to write the book was all of these questions for all of these years, and now we're living in these very prophetic times. And we've got hundreds of thousands of Muslim immigrants spread all over the nation. We've got ISIS in our country. We've got borders that are broken and porous and millions of immigrants. We've got civil disobedience, Ferguson example, cops getting killed, the threats of, some kind of nuclear detonation going off or some kind of attack upon us by terrorists continually. So I said, you know what? It's time for me to put in writing everything I know, everything I've learned. Churches are asking, should we have church security teams? Should churches arm themselves in some way? Or, again, should we just, quote, trust in God? Those are theological questions. They're philosophical questions. They're logistical questions. They're legal questions. And so I wrote this book. It's very readable. I mean, middle school on up can read it. It's an easy read. It's interesting, it's entertaining, it's comical in some places and deadly serious in other places, but I answer all of these questions and a whole lot more from a biblical foundation, from a rational foundation, and from an experiential foundation. So I put everything I know about this. I'm just trying to answer the questions that pastors are asking, Christians are asking, churches are asking, families are asking, and it seems like very few people are answering them, unless you go to some prepper site where it's all about dig a hole, get supplies, and hide from the world. And people say, I don't know if I should do that.
Pastor Gallups, let me ask you, though, about, again, kind of why you did it. I understand there's always a threat of instability. The modern world has all sorts of threats. But what specifically do you see going on in the United States that you believe the church should be prepared for? Let me just, I'll give you a second to think about that. Yeah. We had the Benham brothers on this program about a month ago or so, and they, for about 5 minutes, talked about how they believe within the United States of America, the Christian church is poised to undergo persecution. And they felt that that was good for the church. It's kind of this purification thing that the Bible talks about.
Yeah.
But what do you see? I mean, we got a lot of secular people, of course, listening, not all Christians.
Yeah.
What do you talk to them? Tell them why you believe that people of faith in this country are getting ready to get hammered. Or maybe that's not your view. Maybe you just think that, hey, we ought to always be prepared because who knows what tomorrow's going to bring.
Yeah, well, let me just say to all of your audience, people of faith and people who don't belong to a faith group, listen, this book's good for you too. I mean, I wrote it because look, 100 years ago, the way we lived in America, people prepared all the time. They stored their own food, they canned food, they put up food, they learned how to make their own clothing. They had to. You couldn't run down to a Walmart. You couldn't run down to supermarkets. You just wasn't on a gas station down the road. I mean, but we're so blessed. We've got all this technology and all this luxury and all this comfort. We've gotten kind of fat and lazy, Joe. And so this book is kind of helping people to wake up because we're living in some tumultuous times. Those of us that are people of faith, we believe we're living in very prophetic times. So look, at the very least, I tell people, no one is exempt from natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, fires, earthquakes. I mean, we need to at least be prepared at that level just to take care of ourselves and our family if something like that were to strike tonight. But once you shove that aside, then we're dealing with the stuff that you and your former guest are talking about, and that is, look what happened in Ferguson. Overnight, civil disturbance, a cop shooting, and it turns out the cop was not guilty of what he was accused of, but look at the mayhem that exists even today. Civil disobedience, civil disturbance. Now, of course, we've got attacks on churches, and of course we've got the gay marriage ruling and the radical activist homosexual movement that has already said publicly they're going to start targeting churches. They're going to infiltrate churches. So we've got that to deal with. Plus, as I said, the whole terrorist thing that everybody is concerned about. So, I mean, we could go on with these horrific scenarios, maybe an EMP occurrence or a direct attack on our soil. I'm not an alarmist. I am not a hand-wringer. I don't set dates. I'm not one of those freaky kind of guys. I'm an ex-cop and a pastor. I care about people. I've ministered in deeply disastrous situations. I've watched what happens when people are prepared, and I've seen what happens when people are not prepared. And so I tell people the answer to your question is, look, we've got some tough times for a while here. I mean, in our nation, we're still trying to get things together on this gay marriage ruling and on these borders and who can be here and who can't and all these Muslim immigrants. We're still grappling with that. We don't know what might explode tomorrow, metaphorically speaking.
I don't know whether you saw the story that came out a couple of days ago, but ISIS came out and said, hey, look, our objective is to destroy America. Yeah. We want to destroy its financial foundation. Talked about 9/11 being the first step in that. And, and of course, they didn't say this explicitly, but we know that many of our enemies on that side of the globe are also trying to determine how they can take us out through, an EMP, kind of the low-cost way to take a country like ours down to its knees. It's the Achilles heel of this nation. And you think about, and this is, I mean, you're right, spot on. I mean, when you think about the average contemporary American and whether or not he or she could survive if the grocery store got shut down,
right,
or if the electricity got turned off. And then you think about the prediction, I think it was back 2009, the fall of 2009, 2010, when Senate Energy was determining whether or not they wanted to try to harden our electrical grid against an EMP. And one of the people that came in, an expert, said 90% of America would likely die within a year if an EMP was positioned properly over the country and detonated. Listen, 90%.
Yes, and Joe, listen, the things that you're talking about, just in case some listeners are thinking, okay, here we go with all these conspiracy theories and these reactionaries. No, there are congressional committees meeting on this stuff right now. There, as you know, there are military experts. There are power grid experts that are deeply concerned about these kinds of things, that are thinking about planning these things, understanding that these things could happen. Listen, an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, could certainly occur from a weapon detonation, a nuclear detonation over our atmosphere. But as you know, Joe, it can also occur from the sun. In the 1800s, we had a coronal effect, that devastated the electronics of the day. You say, well, what electronics? Well, there's telegraphs and a few other. I mean, electronics were just kind of coming around. and even back in the 1800s, we had a solar effect that caused an electromagnetic pulse effect upon the Earth that was felt worldwide. Well, now, Joe, our cars are operated by computers and electronics. I mean, all of our life with computers and internets and cell phones and everything is operated by electricity and electric grids and electronics. And if we had a massive solar effect, another solar effect, I mean, it could cripple us, not counting some type of a nuclear detonation. And again, for your listeners that might think I'm being a little melodramatic, I'm just telling you what top scientists and officials and even politicians are wringing their hands over. So
right. So there's all sorts of reasons to get prepared. You know, whether it be from a natural calamity, whether it be man-made. Certainly, we've got all these wonderful material benefits today that the past generations never had. But the reality is we are far more dependent today than past generations have ever been on modern conveniences, and that puts us in a much more risky position unless we know how to be ready for any of the stuff that comes up. So I appreciate your efforts to try to get people engaged in this topic and prepared. There's so many things that modern convenience that can actually help you prepare. I mean, you can go out there and buy a generator for not much cost. Of course, where are you going to get the fuel for it? Well, there are certain ways you can deal with that, too. You can use propane and other things that have long shelf lives. You've got the ability to store nitrogen-packed foods that last for literally decades. Yeah. And I'm sure that you've got a lot of this information in your book.
I do.
Joel Richardson, of course, has been on this program. He recommends that people get it. Be Thou Prepared, Amazon.com. It's a good book on what you need to do to make sure that you can survive any of the natural calamity, man-made calamities up and coming. Pastor Gallup, I appreciate your efforts in that, trying to let people know what may be coming and what they need to do if they're going to be responsible, if they're going to protect their families. And, of course, also, I mean, I think part of this is probably because you want people to be a light.
Absolutely. That's the whole thing, is you be prepared so that when disaster does come, however it comes, you can minister to others.
Well, Pastor Gallups, I appreciate you being on the show again. We'll try to get this podcast up later today if you missed the first part of it. We'll have you back at some point to talk about, I'm sure, other good books that you're going to have coming out. Pastor Gallups, Be Thou Prepared, Amazon.com. Stay with us after these messages. We'll be back with more information and news important to you.